long before the winds carried the names of legends, and long before the earth trembled beneath the footsteps of great shinobi. There existed only forests, vast, unbroken, and ancient. The land was wild, untamed, and silent, but for the rustle of trees and the soft call of birds. Within this primal quiet, humanity learned to survive. Small clans emerged, drawn together by necessity, fear, and the slow dawning realization that only unity could shield them from the storm. From this humble beginning would grow a village that would shape the course of history. Its name would become a whisper, a song, a legend. Konoha, the hidden leaf. Before the idea of villages ever bloomed, shinobi lived fractured lives, their loyalty tied not to a village, but to their clans. These clans were both family and fortress. Some were driven by pride, others by vengeance, and many more by the simple instinct to endure. Among these, two names would rise above the rest: Senju and Uchiha. The Senju were known for their warmth and willpower, their ability to come together and create peace even in war-torn lands. The Uchiha, by contrast, were fierce and proud, wielding their hatred like fire, a power born of love lost, honed into unmatched might. For generations, these two clans clashed, their battles painting the landscape in sorrow and blood. But even amid this chaos, something deeper began to stir. At the heart of the Senju clan stood a boy named Hashirama, a dreamer, a child who would lie on riverbanks and stare at the clouds, imagining a world where children didn't die before their names were known, where brothers could grow old together. Across the battlefield stood Madara, a child of the Uchiha, as brilliant as he was haunted, as powerful as he was wounded. Their first meeting was not on a battlefield, but at a quiet river, when neither knew the other's name, and the world hadn't yet told them to be enemies. They skipped stones, shared hopes, and found in one another a mirror of longing. That bond, fragile and pure, held the first heartbeat of Konoha. Yet dreams in a world built on conflict are always at risk of being shattered. When their identities were revealed and the weight of their clans pressed down upon them, their friendship fractured under the same burden that had broken countless others before. But Hashirama, relentless in his hope, believed they could end the cycle. Through treaties, through cooperation, through shared pain, he reached across that endless divide. And finally, impossibly, Madara reached back. Together, they founded a village, a sanctuary among the trees, a place where clans could gather not as enemies, but as allies, where children could grow up to be more than tools for war. Konoha was born, not from stone or jutsu, but from the fragile hope that peace could be built like a home, layer by layer, breath by breath. The hidden leaf bloomed in a clearing surrounded by towering trees. Its streets were quiet at first, its buildings humble, made of timber and stone. But in those narrow alleys and budding courtyards, something sacred took root. The will of fire, an invisible flame passed from teacher to student, parent to child. A belief that protecting others, even at the cost of oneself, was the truest strength. It was this spirit that made Konoha more than a place. It became a living ideal, woven into every leaf that danced through its streets, and every life born beneath its eaves. But ideals, no matter how pure, are fragile when carried by men still burdened by the past. Hashirama wanted to lead not as a ruler, but as a guardian. Yet the village needed structure. It needed a symbol. And so, the title of Hokage was born, a shadow beneath the sunlight, a flame against the dark. Hashirama became the first Hokage, and with that name came heavy burdens. Not all agreed with his vision. Madara, once his brother in dream, grew disillusioned. He saw shadows in the foundations of the village, cracks that no fire could seal. He feared that the Uchiha would always remain outcasts, that the dream they had built was already being stolen by compromise. Madara left, his footsteps echoing like thunder across the village's soul. He did not just abandon the dream. They say he sought to destroy it. In the valley where their friendship had once bloomed, the first Hokage and Madara met again, not as brothers, but as bitter symbols of their clan's unhealed wounds. Their battle shook the earth and carved the valley of the end. It was the moment the dream split into legend and lament. Hashirama wept for the world they had almost created, and Konoha, though still standing, would never be the same again. The village endured. It always did. As seasons turned and children became shinobi, Konoha grew in strength and reputation. More clans joined its embrace: the Nara, the Akimichi, the Yamanaka, and others, each bringing their own light and legacy. Schools were built to train the next generation. Festivals filled the air with laughter. Bonds were forged in classrooms and sparring fields. And yet, always beneath the surface, the roots of the village twisted around sorrow. The Uchiha, though part of the village, never truly felt at its center. They were given roles of security, of surveillance, and quietly, they became the eyes of Konoha from the shadows. The dream endured, but it was complicated, flawed, human. And still, the will of fire burned. The Hokage mantle passed from Hashirama to his brother Tobirama, a man of brilliance and cold pragmatism. He loved his village in his own way, a sharp, protective love. But he also feared what could threaten it. He created institutions: the police force, the academy, the ANBU. He placed systems where once there was only instinct. And with those systems came stability, but also suspicion. The delicate dance between safety and freedom began. And so the village moved forward, each step echoing with both promise and regret, until the world outside could no longer be ignored. War was coming. The world beyond the forest stirred with unrest. Nations were forming identities of their own, each with growing hunger for land, power, and dominance. Shinobi villages began to rise across the elemental continents, each carrying their own banners, philosophies, and ambitions. But in the end, they all marched to the same rhythm, the rhythm of war. It was not long before the first true test of Konoha's resolve arrived in the form of the first great ninja war. Young shinobi were called to battlefields that stretched like scars across the land. The ideal of peace was now burdened with armor and blood, and the children of the Hidden Leaf, barely old enough to understand the weight of a kunai, were thrust into the chaos. Under the guidance of Tobirama Senju, Konoha weathered the storm. His decisions were swift and sharp, often controversial, but effective. Where Hashirama dreamed, Tobirama built. He restructured the village's governance, balanced power between clans, and worked to contain the simmering tension with the Uchiha. But despite his brilliance, Tobirama's story would end on the battlefield. In a final mission, surrounded by enemies and knowing the risk, he chose to sacrifice himself so that his comrades might live. With calm acceptance, he named Hiruzen Sarutobi, a student of both Senju brothers, as the third Hokage. A new era began, one of transition, preservation, and the delicate dance between the old ways and a changing world. Hiruzen, known as the Professor, embodied the ideal of balance. He was a scholar of all jutsu, a man who valued peace deeply, yet understood the necessity of strength. His era was marked by a fragile calm, but even in peace, the seeds of conflict continued to grow. The Uchiha remained distanced from the village's heart. Hidden Leaf continued to expand, but so too did its shadows. The next generation grew beneath that duality. Brilliant young shinobi, molded by ambition, duty, and the quiet ache of inherited sorrow. Among them were Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru, Hiruzen's brightest students, each destined for greatness and heartbreak. As the Second Great Ninja War erupted, the Hidden Leaf once again found itself submerged in bloodshed. Hiruzen, weary and aged before his time, led with conviction. It was in this era that Konoha began to understand the weight of sacrifice in full. The land became littered with unmarked graves. Dreams were buried beneath mud and rain. But from this devastation rose new heroes, each shaped by the horrors they survived. Tsunade, the heir to the Senju name, became a legendary medic, using her gifts to heal wounds the war carved into both bodies and hearts. Orochimaru, ever curious, began walking the line between discovery and darkness. And Jiraiya, with eyes full of wonder and heart full of dreams, wandered the world in search of purpose. Still, peace was fleeting. The Third War arrived like thunder. It was in this conflict that Konoha would witness the rise of the Yellow Flash, Minato Namikaze, a prodigy whose speed turned the tides of battles, whose golden presence became the last light many enemies ever saw. His feats became legend, his name whispered with awe, even in the enemy camps. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that the will of fire still blazed bright. And when the war ended, and the wounds began to scab over, Hiruzen passed the torch to Minato, naming him the fourth Hokage. Minato's time was brief, but brilliant. He married Kushina Uzumaki, the vessel of the nine-tailed fox, and together they brought into the world a child, Naruto, a boy born not of peace, but with the hope of peace resting in his small hands. But the world, as always, had other plans. On the night of Naruto's birth, darkness descended. The masked man, Obito, though none knew it yet, released the Nine Tails upon the village. Chaos erupted. Buildings crumbled. Lives were lost in an instant. In a final, desperate act of love and duty, Minato and Kushina sealed the beast inside their newborn son, dying with smiles etched in sorrow and hope. The village was left scarred, both physically and emotionally. Hiruzen resumed the mantle of Hokage, and the burden of secrets returned. Naruto, now orphaned, became the vessel of the very beast that had taken so much from the village. And though he was just a child, Konoha's wounds were fresh, and fear turned to resentment. The boy grew up under cold stares and whispered hatred. He was alone, carrying a legacy he didn't understand. But still, within him, the will of fire flickered. Time moved forward. Generations shifted. The village rebuilt. New teams formed: Kakashi, Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto, the next bearers of Konoha's fate. And yet, beneath the surface, the roots of old pain writhed. The Uchiha clan, still distrusted and marginalized, began to question their place in the village. Fugaku Uchiha, Sasuke's father and the clan leader, harbored deep concerns. A coup was whispered among the shadows, an uprising born of years of quiet exclusion. Hiruzen struggled. Danzo, a man of roots and ruthless efficiency, believed the threat must be erased before it bloomed. And so, a decision was made, one that would haunt the soul of the village forever. Itachi Uchiha, a prodigy among prodigies, was chosen to be both executioner and protector. He killed his entire clan in the night, sparing only his younger brother, Sasuke. He vanished into the dark, labeled a traitor. The truth, that he had done it to prevent civil war and protect the village from within, would remain hidden. Konoha moved on, but the wound festered. Sasuke, consumed by grief and vengeance, turned inward. Naruto, still desperate for acknowledgement, trained harder. And in their shared sorrow, a fragile bond was born. As the days passed, the Chunin exams arrived. Another chapter in the life of the Hidden Leaf. A moment of excitement, of young dreams sharpening into resolve. But behind the spectacle, more shadows gathered. Orochimaru, once a child of Konoha, returned with venom in his heart. His invasion would rock the village, shatter its foundations, and once again leave Konoha without a Hokage. The cycle continued. But always, through every betrayal and loss, the will of fire endured. It lived in the teachers who stood firm, in the children who dared to dream, and in the quiet strength of a village that refused to break, even when surrounded by ruin. Smoke still curled through the air, like faded memories in the aftermath of Orochimaru's invasion. The once celebratory grounds of the Chunin exams lay shattered beneath the weight of betrayal. Konoha had lost its third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the man who had guided generations, who had seen the village through war and peace alike. His death echoed not just through the streets of the village, but in the hearts of those who had known him, loved him, and carried his lessons forward. Beneath the solemn sky and behind the silence of morning, there remained a flickering warmth. His final act, a defense of the village he had served for so long, became a symbol not of despair, but of resolve. In the days that followed, the village began to gather itself from the wreckage once more. But loss weighed heavy. The question of leadership arose, and eyes turned to the past in search of a path to the future. Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin, and a former student of Hiruzen, was offered the title of Hokage, but he declined. Instead, he sought out another, the one he believed carried not only the strength of the Sannin, but also the heart to protect Konoha, Tsunade. She had long wandered, her heart fractured by war and the loss of those she loved. But when Jiraiya found her, he offered more than a title. He offered her a chance to believe again, in the village, in its people, and in herself. After much resistance and reflection, Tsunade accepted, and with her return, Konoha began to heal. She brought with her the legacy of the Senju, the healing hand of a master medic, and a firm belief in the next generation's strength. The younger shinobi continued to grow under her guidance. Naruto, in particular, trained with renewed purpose, fueled by the dream of one day becoming Hokage himself. He carried the will of those who had gone before him, though he barely understood its weight. The bond between Naruto and Sasuke deepened, shaped by competition, admiration, and the lingering shadows of loneliness that trailed behind both boys. But something fragile trembled within Sasuke's heart, an ache that never stopped growing. The pain of his clan's loss, the betrayal by his brother, the constant reminder that power was the only way to achieve justice. It was all too much. And when Orochimaru extended his hand in the darkness, Sasuke, feeling powerless and betrayed by the village that had failed to protect his family, took it. He left under the cloak of night. And when Naruto chased after him, it wasn't with anger. It was desperation, a plea not to be left behind again. Their clash was not just of jutsu, but of hearts breaking. Sasuke's decision to leave Konoha was like a new wound carved into the village's history, a deep scar that would shape its future. Years passed. Missions continued. Friendships evolved. The Akatsuki, a shadowy organization, once dismissed as distant and unthreatening, began to move in earnest. Each member was a rogue shinobi, powerful and deadly, with goals that defied comprehension. Their aim: to collect the tailed beasts, the great chakra monsters sealed within hosts across the ninja world. Konoha, as always, stood at the center of the coming storm. Naruto trained tirelessly, seeking strength not for revenge, but for the promise he made: to bring Sasuke back. Jiraiya took him under his wing, and together they traveled, learning, growing, and preparing for the trials ahead. Back in the village, Tsunade worked to fortify Konoha against the growing threat. Yet no wall, no plan could have prepared them for the day when pain itself descended from the sky. Pain, the leader of the Akatsuki, cloaked in mystery and guided by a vision of peace, twisted through suffering. Attacked with overwhelming force. The village was leveled in an instant, buildings reduced to rubble beneath a silent, crushing wave of destruction. Lives were lost before a scream could even escape. The people of Konoha, so often at the heart of history, now found themselves gasping for air beneath its weight. But from within the destruction, Naruto emerged, not as the child once scorned, but as the shinobi shaped by fire and love. He fought not with vengeance, but with understanding. He listened. He asked why. He reached into the heart of his enemy and saw not just the pain of the moment, but the broken story behind it. Through this act, not a final blow, but a final conversation, Naruto changed the course of destiny. He showed the village and the world that peace was not a weapon, but a choice. And when the dust settled, Konoha began to rise again. Homes were rebuilt, families mourned and stood tall, and Naruto, the boy once blamed for disaster, became a symbol of hope. He had inherited the will of fire, not by blood, but by living it every day, through rejection, perseverance, and an unbreakable heart. But peace, as always, was fleeting. Behind the scenes, another shadow grew. Tobi, the masked man who once unleashed the Nine Tails upon Konoha, now moved with purpose. He manipulated events, gathered pawns, and stoked the embers of old hatred. The fourth great ninja war loomed on the horizon, vast and terrible. But this time, the world was ready to face it together. Konoha stood not as an isolated symbol, but as a cornerstone of alliance, a village that had weathered centuries of pain and still dared to hope. And so the story of Konoha continued, its roots reaching deep into the past, its branches stretching ever toward a future written not in stone, but in choice. The whispers of war had long since turned to roars, echoing across the world like the crashing of ancient waves upon the shore. And at the heart of it all, like it had always been, was Konoha, the hidden leaf forged in blood and sealed by dreams, now stood alongside former enemies under a single banner: the allied shinobi forces. The 5 great nations, once torn apart by politics and suspicion, now gathered as one, not for conquest, but for survival. For beyond the lands they each protected, a far greater threat had emerged. An enemy who sought to rewrite the very fabric of existence. Toby, the man behind the mask, the whisper behind every tragedy, declared the eye of the moon plan. His goal was nothing less than absolute illusion, an end to all suffering through a dream that none could wake from. To achieve this, he sought the 10 tails, a beast born from the unity of all tailed beasts, and the power of the Rinnegan to cast infinite Tsukuyomi upon the moon itself. For him, peace was not something earned, but something enforced. And standing in opposition to this dream of silence were those who had found strength in pain, unity in difference, and hope in one another. Konoha's shinobi stood tall among the ranks of this new alliance. Naruto, no longer a child chasing acknowledgement, but a leader embraced by the world, became a beacon on the battlefield. Beside him fought Kakashi, the ever-resilient copy ninja, and others from every corner of the hidden leaf who had watched their home burn and bloom again and again. Each shinobi carried their own ghosts into the fray, but they did not fight alone. The will of fire had never spread so far, its embers glowing in the hearts of allies from every land. In the heat of the war, the battlefields stretched for miles, forests scorched, rivers split, skies darkened by jutsu that tore through the heavens. Familiar faces were resurrected by forbidden jutsu, memories turned into weapons, each one a painful reminder that peace was never easily won. Among them stood the reanimated Hokage of Konoha's past, Hashirama, Tobirama, Hiruzen, and Minato, brought back from the silence of history by Orochimaru's hand, now turned toward the cause of salvation. Their presence was surreal. To see the founders of the village walking among the present generation was like gazing at a dream turned real. Hashirama, with the gentle strength of a leader who once envisioned a peaceful future, looked upon what had become of his dream. Tobirama, ever calculating, absorbed the evolution of the systems he helped create. Hiruzen watched the students of his students with quiet pride, and Minato, the 4th Hokage, saw in Naruto not only a son, but a realization of all he had hoped to protect. The reanimated Hokage stood not as phantoms of a forgotten age, but as reminders that the village was not just a place, but a story passed through time. A story written in sacrifice and rewritten by each new soul who chose to protect it. And still, as battle raged and hope flickered in the storm, a greater truth began to emerge. The masked man known as Toby was none other than Obito Uchiha, once thought dead, once full of dreams not unlike Naruto's own. Twisted by grief, shattered by the loss of Rin, and disillusioned by the world's cruelty, Obito had become the vessel for Madara's will. His descent into darkness was not born of hatred alone, but from the heartbreak of a world where good people died and dreams crumbled. And in that, he became the greatest warning that even the kindest heart could become a storm when drowned by despair. Naruto did not fight him with fists alone. Their clash was not just a battle of chakra, but of ideals. Through every strike and every word, Naruto offered Obito a reflection, a mirror of who he used to be and who he could still become. It was a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even in a world so often stained with sorrow, one could still choose to believe. As Obito began to falter, the true hand behind the curtain emerged at last. Madara Uchiha, reborn in flesh and power, carrying with him the weight of 1,000 ambitions. The battlefield, once vast and chaotic, now centered on a single storm, the final confrontation between the dreams of the past and the resolve of the present. Madara, with his eternal Mangekyo and Rinnegan, fought like a force of nature. His desire to end conflict through domination stood in stark contrast to the fragile, living hope carried by the shinobi who opposed him. But even Madara's might was not the end. From the shadows of his ambitions rose Kaguya Otsutsuki, the progenitor of chakra itself, sealed long ago by her own sons. Her return was cataclysmic, the final twist in a tale older than any village. She sought not just dominion, but reclamation. To her, humanity's struggle was a rebellion to be undone. In her presence, time and space bent, and the shinobi of every nation stood upon the brink of eternity itself. It was then, in that final crucible, that Konoha's legacy was truly tested. United not by blood, not by nation, but by a shared belief in one another. The shinobi overcame not with hatred, but with unity. Naruto and Sasuke, fated rivals, now fought side by side. With the strength inherited from the Sage of Six Paths, they brought an end not just to Kaguya's reign, but to the chain of cycles that had long governed their world. And in the wake of that battle, when the world stood in fragile silence, the true final confrontation emerged. Not between enemies, but between two halves of the same soul. Naruto and Sasuke, bound by fate and philosophy, faced one another one last time. Their clash was thunderous, but in its aftermath came clarity. With both lying broken but alive, the seeds of a new era were planted. Konoha, battered by generations of conflict, could now look to a future not built on shadows, but on light. In the stillness that followed the final battle, Konoha began to breathe again. The smoke had cleared, the storms had passed, and a quiet dawn broke across the land of fire. It was not the triumphant cheer of victory that echoed through the world, but a gentle sigh of relief, like a tired soul finally laying down its burdens. The scars left by the war, both seen and unseen, ran deep, etched into the hearts of every shinobi who had stood on the front lines. But within that pain, something softer stirred. An understanding, a shared resilience, a flickering light that had survived even the darkest night. For Konoha, the road ahead was no longer shaped solely by vengeance or fear, but by the fragile hope that peace could be something more than a pause between battles. In the weeks and months that followed, the hidden leaf began the slow, careful process of healing. Fields were replanted, homes rebuilt, graves tended to with quiet reverence. And throughout it all, the people of the village walked not with the weight of the past pressing down, but with the promise of the future guiding their steps. Naruto returned to Konoha, not as the loud, mischievous boy once scorned by many, but as a hero embraced by all. He carried no pride in his step, no arrogance in his voice, only the same warm smile and the same unwavering spirit that had carried him through every battle, every heartbreak, and every rejection. His journey, from outcast to savior, had not changed who he was. It had only revealed what had always been there, a heart strong enough to carry the pain of others, and a will bright enough to chase the dawn, even when surrounded by endless night. As Naruto found himself at the center of the village's newfound peace, others too stepped forward to guide the rebuilding. Kakashi Hatake, his weary eyes shadowed by all he had lost, accepted the mantle of the sixth Hokage. It was not a role he had ever desired, but one he accepted with solemn grace. He had seen too much, survived too much, to carry illusions. And yet, precisely because of that, he led with quiet strength and humility. Under his guidance, Konoha reached outward, not with weapons, but with open hands. Diplomatic bridges were rebuilt. Trust began to bloom where suspicion once reigned. The other villages, once wary of the Leaf's ambitions, now saw it not as a rival, but as a partner in shaping the next chapter of the shinobi world. With each passing season, the village began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. The academy welcomed students who dreamed not of war, but of exploration and discovery. The hospital no longer overflowed with wounded, but instead became a place of learning and innovation. Even the Uchiha district, long silent and haunted by grief, began to stir once more, as Sasuke, though often wandering, left behind signs of return. Small offerings, quiet repairs, hints of presence that said, in their own way, that he had not abandoned the village, only needed time to reconcile with it. Through it all, Tsunade watched from the background. The former Hokage, her strength dimmed, but her will undiminished, found peace not in power, but in witnessing a generation rise from the ashes she had once feared would consume them. Her gamble on Naruto, her fierce protection of life in all its messy, painful beauty, it had not been in vain. And in the quiet moments, as she walked the streets, no longer trembling under threat, she smiled in that rare, softened way she had once reserved only for the past. The village's traditions endured, but they were no longer bound in the rigidity of old fears. The Chunin exams were held again. this time not as displays of superiority, but as a celebration of growth. Teams from every nation came, not as spies or rivals, but as friends. The tournament stands, once filled with wary glances and forced smiles, now rang with genuine laughter. Bonds were forged, not on the battlefield, but through shared meals, games, and stories told late into the night. Konoha itself transformed, not just in spirit, but in structure. The skyline changed. Technology began to emerge. Communication devices, infrastructure improvements, even small marvels powered by chakra engineering. But even as the village modernized, it never let go of its roots. The trees still stood tall. The Hokage monument still looked out across the rooftops like silent guardians. The will of fire, once a simple phrase, now glowed as a living truth, passed from one generation to the next, not through speeches, but through the quiet strength of those who kept moving forward, one step at a time. And yet, peace was not a static thing. It was a garden, fragile and in constant need of tending. There were still missions, still tensions, still the flickers of darkness in far corners of the world. But the difference now was that Konoha faced these challenges not as a lone village, but as part of a community. Its strength was no longer in being feared, but in being trusted. Naruto, in time, stood before the Hokage monument, not as a dreamer, but as its newest guardian, the seventh Hokage, his face etched in stone alongside the men and women who had shaped the village through blood and fire. His journey had come full circle, from lonely child to beloved protector, and yet he remained, at heart, the same boy who once vowed to never give up, to never run away, to never stop believing that even one person could make a difference. And as Konoha stood beneath the stars, crickets singing softly in the cool night air, the village did not feel like a relic of past wars. It felt like a promise, a place where pain could give rise to strength, where loss could carve space for love, where every whispered prayer for peace became one more brick in a future built by those who refused to surrender to despair. In the gentle hush of that future, Konoha endured, not just as a hidden village, but as a living testament to the resilience of those who dared to dream. As the days flowed gently into years, Konoha matured with a quiet dignity, like an old tree whose roots grew deeper with every passing season. The village no longer wore the scars of war like open wounds, but as subtle reminders of all that had been endured and overcome. Peace had not dulled its edge, but rather softened it into something more reflective, something more whole. And in the calm of this new era, life began to weave its simple, sacred rhythm back through the streets, the trees, and the hearts of those who called the hidden leaf their home. Children now grew up with tales of heroes who had once walked among them, of Naruto and Sasuke, of Kakashi and Sakura, of the brave shinobi who had given everything to bring the world to this point. These stories were no longer heavy with sorrow, but tinged with awe and gratitude. The village's classrooms echoed not only with the lessons of ninjutsu and chakra control, but with laughter, questions, and dreams that reached far beyond the battlefield. Little hands grasped at wooden kunai, not out of fear, but out of curiosity, inspired by tales of bravery rather than bound by the weight of conflict. Naruto, now a father and leader, shouldered the twin responsibilities of family and village with the same boundless spirit that had carried him through his youth. As Hokage, he was tireless, attending council meetings, overseeing missions, reading endless scrolls, but always finding time to smile at a passing villager or offer a hand to a crying child. Yet it was in those quiet moments, walking through the village at twilight, holding his son's hand, or standing atop the Hokage monument, watching the stars, that he found his true peace. He understood now what his father must have felt all those years ago, that to protect something so dear meant bearing every burden without hesitation. The village, once shaped by the battles between clans, now thrived through cooperation. The Ino Shika Cho trio continued, but not as a necessity for war. It had become a symbol of enduring friendship, of inherited strength passed down not to fight, but to protect. The Hyuga embraced a gentler philosophy, their internal divisions slowly dissolving under the guidance of new leaders who believed strength and compassion could coexist. The once isolated Uchiha legacy, through Sasuke's quiet guidance and Sarada's bright ambition, found a new place within the heart of the village, not feared, not pitied, but honored. Even the shinobi, who once wandered, those who had struggled to find their place in a world without conflict, began to return. Konohamaru, no longer the mischievous boy trailing behind his idols, had become a capable leader in his own right, guiding the next generation with a balance of strength and humor. Young genin teams were formed, mentored, tested, not in great wars, but in missions that brought aid, understanding, and unity between the villages. Peace had not erased the shinobi way. It had refined it. Technology also found its way into Konoha's fabric, blending the ancient with the modern in quiet harmony. Communication between villages became instantaneous. Medical ninjutsu advanced rapidly, saving lives that once would have slipped away. Lights glowed along cobbled paths at night, and children sketched ideas for new tools in the margins of their scrolls. But at its heart, the village remained unchanged, still wrapped in the rustle of wind through leaves, still cradled by the enduring warmth of its people. On festival nights, the streets were filled with paper lanterns and the laughter of families reunited. Fireworks bloomed in the sky like fleeting dreams, each burst a reflection of hope renewed. Elders sat in folding chairs, watching the younger generation dance and sing. Parents held their children close. And somewhere, always, Naruto stood among them, not above, but within. Just another soul in the crowd, smiling at the life they had all built together. But even in this piece, Konoha never forgot. There were memorial stones that stood in solemn corners of the village, etched with names, weathered by time, yet revered. Flowers were left quietly. Stories whispered by candlelight. The village did not wallow in grief, but honored it. In doing so, the people ensured that the lives lost were not in vain, but woven into every step forward, every new beginning. As Sarada, Boruto, Mitsuki, and other young shinobi began to find their paths, there was a sense that a new story was unfolding. One not defined by endless struggle, but by learning, growth, and connection. They were not asked to be warriors. They were encouraged to be thinkers, peacemakers, explorers. Their battles, when they came, were not of vengeance, but of understanding. And in this, the village found its greatest evolution, not in strength of arm, but in strength of heart. The will of fire endured, not as a rallying cry for war, but as a quiet belief that love, sacrifice, and perseverance would always light the way forward. It lived in the meals shared between neighbors, in the training grounds where laughter replaced grunts of pain, in the late-night conversations between old friends and the early morning greetings of children running to the academy. It was not loud. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, steady, unwavering, like the roots of the forest itself. And so, Konoha remained, a village built from stone and sacrifice, tempered by pain and transformed by love. A place where heroes were not monuments, but neighbors. Where every leaf that fluttered in the breeze carried the echo of dreams once thought lost, now made real by the gentle persistence of those who refused to give up. In this quiet chapter of Konoha's tale, there were no great wars, no sweeping tragedies, only life as it should be. And in that peaceful hum of everyday moments, the heart of the village beat stronger than ever, whispering softly through the trees, "We are still here, and we will endure." As the golden haze of twilight gave way to the cool embrace of night, Konoha stood serene beneath the blanket of stars. The rustling leaves above whispered softly in the evening breeze, and lanterns flickered gently along the winding village streets, casting pools of warm light on the cobblestone paths. The day's bustle had quieted into calm, replaced by the soothing rhythm of distant laughter, the clinking of dinnerware in cozy homes, and the soft lull of the wind weaving between rooftops. In this peaceful hour, the hidden leaf stood as a testament to the resilience of dreams and the quiet strength of those who had come before. Within the Hokage's office, light glowed through the windows as Naruto sat alone, the papers before him momentarily forgotten. He looked out across the rooftops toward the mountain, etched with the faces of his predecessors, those stone visages gazing forever toward the horizon. They had each carried the will of fire in their own way. Hashirama, with his dream of unity. Tobirama, with his relentless structure. Hiruzen, with his steadfast heart, Minato with his silent sacrifice, and Tsunade with her fierce compassion. Now, Naruto's face stood among them, not as a monument to power, but as a symbol of perseverance, of hope realized not through force, but through faith in the bonds between people. Outside, children returned home from training, dragging wooden practice swords behind them, their laughter echoing across rooftops as they relived the day's small victories and stumbles. Parents greeted them with gentle smiles and warm meals, and inside those homes, stories were shared of clan histories, of days past, and of the shinobi who had given so much for the peace they now enjoyed. These tales, once heavy with sorrow, had softened with time, becoming lullabies passed from one generation to the next. Old shinobi walked slowly through the streets, no longer warriors, but treasured elders. They paused to share quiet wisdom, to offer a nod of respect, to remember. Their hands, once skilled in the art of battle, now held scrolls, tools, or the hands of grandchildren. And in their presence, Konoha remained anchored, its heart beating steadily with the rhythm of memory and quiet gratitude. They carried with them the history of pain and triumph, and their footsteps were gentle but sure, as if each one traced the village's legacy back through time. In the training fields, under the glow of fireflies, genin teams trained long after the sun had set. Their movements were clumsy, their coordination imperfect, but their determination glowed bright. Behind them stood their sensei, guides shaped by war, but devoted to peace, watching over them not as drill masters, but as patient stewards of the future. These young shinobi did not fight for survival. They trained to protect, to understand, to build bridges rather than burn them. Their strength was not in their fists alone, but in their hearts. Konoha's allies, once distant and wary, now moved freely through its gates. Sand, mist, cloud, and stone, nations once locked in cycles of bloodshed, sent envoys, scholars, and students to walk Konoha's paths. The academy welcomed them with open arms, teaching not only techniques, but the value of empathy and cooperation. Young minds, unburdened by old grudges, built friendships that transcended borders, planting seeds of peace that would one day take root far beyond the village's walls. Beneath the moonlight, the village was hushed, as if the trees themselves were listening to the slow, steady breath of a land at rest. In the quiet corners of the Nara compound, Shikamaru lay back, gazing at the stars, his thoughts like drifting clouds. Not far away, Ino tended to her family's flowers, each bloom a delicate reminder of life's beauty. Choji laughed as his daughter tugged on his sleeve, asking questions about the Akimichi's strength and the best kind of snacks. These small, ordinary moments were the foundation of Konoha's peace, the uncelebrated, unnoticed joys that came only after the storm had passed. In the Hyuga estate, Hinata watched over her sons with a quiet grace, her heart full as Boruto pored over scrolls, and Himawari traced her mother's movements in gentle mimicry. She thought often of Neji, his sacrifice not forgotten, his memory alive in every choice she made to raise her children in a world he helped secure. Sasuke, too, stood at the edge of the village, his silhouette lit by the moon. He was a man still in search of redemption, but no longer running. His daughter, Sarada, dreamed not only of power, but of wisdom. Her path one of healing as much as justice. And above them all, the leaves rustled softly in the wind, each one a reminder of the countless stories intertwined within the village's soul. Some were tales of sorrow and sacrifice, others of joy and laughter. But together, they formed a single, unbroken narrative. The story of a village that refused to fall, even in its darkest hour. A village rebuilt not once, but time and time again, by hands that believed in something greater than themselves. Konoha's strength had never been in its walls, or its warriors alone. It lived in the bonds between its people, in the quiet moments of understanding, in the willingness to forgive, and the courage to begin again. It was a place where even the deepest wounds could one day heal, where every goodbye carried the promise of return, and where every end whispered the beginning of something new. As the night deepened and sleep settled gently across the rooftops, the hidden leaf glowed softly under the stars, a village wrapped in peace, held together by memories, dreams, and the enduring warmth of a fire that would never fade. And in that peaceful stillness, Konoha slept, not as a fortress, but as a home.